Hello, friends. Hope you're doing well today. Uh, Today, I'd like to introduce a book by someone I'd like to call a friend. In fact, I believe I certainly knew him, and I would be honored to call him a friend. Um, it's the book title is Adams the Pilot by William Corr, Bill Corr, as I knew him. I think he's died now. I'm not sure when or where, but he was a long-term resident of Japan, Kansai, and I knew him sort of from about 1992 to 1995, 6. Not very well, it has to be said. I didn't meet him very often, but anyway, the reason I have great respect for him is that he urged me to write a big book on Sato, Ernest Sato, and of course, uh, I did write a big book on Sato, the diaries and letters of Ernest Sato, Sir Ernest Sato. It took me 5 years, and Bill wrote the preface. So I've got many things to be grateful to him, grateful for from him. All right, so let me share the first of all the cover of the book, Adams the Pilot, and I should stress that it is still for sale through Routledge, and what I'm going to read is copyright Bill Corr, so it's actually Bill's copyright, but I will also show you where you can buy the book. So I hope that the publisher won't will forgive me doing this if I give them free advertising. So there we are. Um, so here's the outline. Adams the Pilot: The Life and Times of Captain William Adams, 1564 to 1620. William Corr, Routledge, 1995, History, 241 pages. This book charts the life and times of Captain William Adams, who lived in the period 1564 to 1620. Adams himself wrote little. His letters and logs, while vivid and valuable, would convey too little about the eventful years between 1600 and 1620 on their own, 1600 being the year when he arrived in Japan. Other sources, as the various writings of other Europeans in Japan, complete the tale, including mentions of significant historical events. For example, in 1588, William Adams commanded a supply ship, the Richard Duffield. That's spelt wrongly, actually. It's two F's, Duffield. At the time of Philip II of Spain's attempted invasion of England, the enterprise of England, the Spanish Armada. The enterprise of England is what the Spanish called it. We know it in English as the Spanish Armada. And in 1600, the first Dutch ship, Liefde, arrives in Japan with Adams on board. William Adams is taken before Tokugawa Ieyasu. Again, it's spelt wrong. It's Ieyasu. It's not. It's Ieyasu. And questioned. He explains that Holland and England are at war with Spain and Portugal. Ieyasu declines the Portuguese suggestion that he execute the Liefde's crew. Okay. So that's what it says in Google. Here is where you can buy it from Routledge directly there. I have just purchased the paperback from Amazon Japan, which is slightly more expensive than the one here, but not very much. And it'll get to me much quicker. All right. So, having done that and pointed out where it can be purchased, I would now like to go to read part of the text. So first of all, I'm going to stop this share and then go to the other share thing that I want to share. If I can just, there we are. Hang on. Just bear with me a moment. There we are. All right. Hopefully you can see that. I've scanned the book, so I'm reading from the scan. It's a lot easier, I find, to do that than read from the book itself. And so there we are. Adams, the pilot, the life and times of Captain William Adams, 1564 to 1620, William Corr, Japan Library. And before I start, I just say that Bill was a delightful character. He, I think he was from Cumbria, and he often smoked a pipe, and he was just a very funny man, I thought. I enjoyed his company greatly. Um, okay, so here is the publishing stuff. 1995, copyright William Corr, and it's Japan Library, Knoll House, The Crescent, 35 The Crescent, Sandgate, Folkestone, Kent. Very appropriate since Adams was a Kentish man. Okay, here we've got the contents on the right, preface, map, chronology, Adams and his age, William Adams' early life, the Mahu and de Cordes fleet, the voyage, landfall in Hawaii, arrival in Japan, the Jesuit presence in Japan, Adams and the missionaries, survivors, the coming of the Dutch, the Hirado Britons, conflict at Hirado, Adams in Japan, and voyages. And then the greatest and powerfulest tyranny, epilogue. And then appendices, two appendices, bibliographical note, bibliography, glossary, index, and index of shipping. By the way, on the page which I was showing you just before, let me just go back to that for a minute, if I can. Can I go back there? Yes. If you go to, let me see, where did I find it? No, not there. Sorry. Not there. I think if I put this down less, yes, there we are. You can preview the book, and in fact, you can read quite a lot of it for free anyway. So there we are, Adams and his age. If you click on that, or in Google, there you are. You've got it to read there. There might be some pages that they deliberately miss out at some point. That sometimes happens. I think possibly pages 5 and 6 were missed in this one. Let's have a look. Ooh. Yes, there we are. Pages 5 and 6 are not shown in this preview. But anyway, there is a preview. So, all right, let's go back to what I was sharing before. So I've just read the contents, haven't I? And so we'll go on to the next page. Preface. On the left, you've got, I think it's the only illustration in the entire book, quite amusingly. It's not a book for pictures. If you want pictures, you're out of luck with this one. But I find Bill's text is quite fascinating, or interesting anyway. So I'm willing to put up with that. Okay, so here we go. Preface. The present work had its genesis in the reading which preceded the writing of Miura Anjin, the story of Captain William Adams, published by Dawn Press of Nara in 1989. To John Terry of Dawn Press, due thanks are offered. Others assisted at various stages. Michael Cooper, whom I also knew, Charles Boxer, Derek Massarella, and Anthony Farrington were kind enough to suggest helpful clues. The errors and omissions are not to be laid at their doors, however. Yes, these are the major figures in the writing of the history of Adams and the English factory. These are great historians, Cooper, Boxer, Massarella, and Farrington. It's a pantheon of sorts. 1, 2, 3, 4, yeah, four historians. And I think Bill is perhaps not quite up there, but he's certainly very high in my estimation. Adams himself wrote little. His letters and logs, while vivid and valuable, would convey too little about the eventful years between 1600 and 1620 on their own. Other sources, such as the various writings of other Europeans in Japan, complete the tale. The researches of Derek Massarella and Anthony Farrington provide much detail which was not available to P.G. Rogers or Richard Blaker earlier this century. As Michael Cooper has said, eventually a full biography of the redoubtable and ill-fated Richard Cox will be written. It will be worth reading because Cox, an immensely likable man, if an indifferent merchant and chief, lived in interesting times. The Adams legend, which continues sporadically to the present day, is not the least astonishing aspect of a remarkable career and an eventful life. Those who have perpetuated Adams' memory, whether Japanese or British, deserve congratulation. It is remarkable but true that the names of only 2 Europeans of the era of the Christian century are widely known in contemporary Japan. One is Francis Xavier, the other is, predictably, William Adams. Finally, thanks are due to Sonoe Kurimoto Corr for unfailing tolerance, encouragement, forbearance, and love. William Corr, Lhasa, June 1995. Trust Bill to be writing from an exotic place like Lhasa. As for this talk of a biography of Cox, it's quite interesting. He's urging somebody to write it because he urged me to write about Sato, as I've just mentioned. And I'm sort of tempted to do something about Cox. What exactly, I won't say now, but I have an idea. Okay, let's go on to the next page. So we've got the map of, whoopsie, what's happened there? I don't want to create a PDF. Let's move it over a bit. Yeah, that's a map of feudal Japan with all the domains named. And then we've got the chronology, which is, it's an impressive chronology. It's very detailed. I'm not sure I'm going to read the whole chronology, but it is very good. It goes on, there you are, goes on and on, basically. There you are, very full. All right, so I've skipped the chronology, but I'm going to read Adams and his age. William Adams was born in England in 1564 and died in Japan in 1620. Believed to have been the first English speaker to reside in Japan, he became an advisor to the founder of the Tokugawa Shogunate, Ieyasu, and was briefly an influential figure in Japan. William Adams' life is of interest for a number of reasons. His upbringing in Elizabethan England and his command of a supply ship at the time of Philip II of Spain's attempted invasion and subjugation of England in 1588. The enterprise of England, known subsequently in English-speaking countries as the Spanish Armada, shaped his attitude towards Catholicism and Spanish power. Despite this, during his prolonged residence in Japan, he never lacked either Catholic or Spanish friends. Adams, like many of his contemporaries, spent some time in Dutch service, most notably aboard the 5-vessel Mahu and de Cordes fleet of 1598 to 1600. Whether he served aboard one or more Dutch ships attempting to discover the non-existent Northwest Passage to Asia is uncertain. The Catholic missionaries in Japan later wrote that he did, but the evidence beyond this second-hand assertion is non-existent. The voyage which took Adams to Japan was a signal disaster, both in terms of human life and as a commercial enterprise. Only one of the 5 ships returned to Europe, and that bore no rich cargo of the kind the expedition's backers had desired. Of the remaining 4, one surrendered to the Spanish at Valparaiso, that's Chile, another to the Portuguese in the Moluccas, and one foundered with all hands in the Pacific Ocean. The Lifte, to which Adams had fortunately transferred, reached Japan in wretched condition. As Adams recorded at the time, the Lifte came to anchor in Bungo Strait. There were but 24 men living aboard. Of these, 3 died the following day and another 3 not long afterwards. Adams' career in Japan is the aspect of his life which has proven most attractive to novelists and historians. He was an unofficial advisor to Tokugawa Ieyasu, a shipwright, and almost certainly a cartographer. He traded on his own account as well as acting as a commercial agent for Japanese merchants and Europeans. The period of his residence in Japan saw many changes in the political life of the country. At the time of his arrival, he was, as he recorded, in danger of death by crucifixion and impalement at the instigation of the Jesuits. By the time of his death in 1620, the Jesuits, together with the other missionary orders then active in Japan, were in no position to influence affairs. Indeed, Adams briefly supplanted the erudite Jesuit João Rodrigues as Ieyasu's interpreter and advisor. Adams' influence on Japan's rulers was short-lived. The two ships he built in the European style were not the forerunners of an immense seagoing fleet, although nothing but Tokugawa policy prevented the construction of such a fleet, armed with European-style artillery and manned by seafarers equal to any in Pacific waters. Although Adams did what he could to facilitate the trade of his fellow countrymen of the East India Company in Japan, the EIC's venture was unsuccessful, lasting a mere decade, 1613 to 1623, yet in 1673 the EIC tried to return unsuccessfully. While it is true that the British trading settlement established in Japan in the first quarter of the 17th century proved to be ultimately a failure, the history of what chroniclers have called the English factory remains a fascinating, if relatively unimportant, footnote in the long story of relations between two great maritime and mercantile powers. In retrospect, it is evident that while the East India Company's trading venture in Japan was of marginal importance to the British, the presence of European traders in Japan was of no greater real significance to the Tokugawa shogunate. At the time, however, things were perceived differently. In December 1615, Richard Cox, the Cape merchant, that's chief merchant, Cape merchant of the Hirado factory, as trading stations were then known, recorded that Ieyasu graciously offered to give the English anything that might be for the benefit of their nation, esteeming us above all other Christian nations whatsoever. Murakami and Murakawa, 1973, page 163. Within less than a decade, the IEC's, that's EIC's, I think should be, Japanese venture was abandoned. The East India Company's Japanese venture was abandoned, the entire endeavor apparently a total loss. Upon the expulsion of the Spanish and Portuguese a few years later, the chief rivals of the English, the Dutch, became the unchallenged monopolists of what little trade and intercourse survived between Japan and the exterior world, other than a relatively insignificant volume of trade, foreign trade, in the hands of a small, closely supervised Chinese mercantile community permitted, like the Dutch, to reside at Nagasaki. Plutchov, 1983, page 77. From the earliest days of the English factory at Hirado, it was clearly understood that the acquisition of the right to trade into China was a highly desirable objective. In retrospect, it seems probable that the successful establishment of secure trading relations between the Britons at Hirado and one or more ports in China would have made the East India Company's venture a success rather than a failure. There were, however, a number of difficulties which stood in the way of attaining so desirable an end. The Chinese, who had a well-founded apprehension of Japanese piracy and raiding, refused to permit Japanese vessels to enter their ports, and the indirect trade funneled through Okinawa, Macau, and illegally Tsushima was jealously guarded. It was enormously profitable and far too highly coveted to permit the English a share of it. Much has been made of Cox's reliance on the China captain. Desperately hoping a profit from the Chinese trade, Cox entrusted 6,636 taels of silver to the China captain, a junk skipper called Li Tan or Li Han Kok, who wished to act as an intermediary for trading but was cheated by him. Makino, 1983, page 78. Whether Cox was deliberately cheated or not is open to question. Cox was a shrewd judge of character and knew the individual concerned for a considerable period of time. In any case, the China captain and his brother were not unsuccessful as merchants. The Chinas of late time, within these 2 or 3 years, have begun a trade into certain islands called by them Takasanga, and it is named in our sea cards Isla Formosa. That's Taiwan, near to the coast of China. The place the shipping enters into is called Las Islas Pescadores, but none but small shipping can enter, Neither will they suffer any shipping or trade with any people but China's. It is within 30 leagues, as they say, of the main of China, the mainland of China, so that they make 2 or 3 voyages in small shipping each monsoon. Andrea Dittis, Li Tan, and Captain Huo, his brother, are the greatest adventurers for that place. Adventurers for that place, I think. They sent 2 small junks the last year and bought silk for the one half they pay either at Cochin, China or Bantam. Cochin, China is the southern part of Vietnam. Bantam is on the island of Java. Thompson, 1883, Volume 2, page 298. This is Cox's diary, as edited by Sir Edward Maund Thompson in 1883. There has been a subsequent Japanese edition in the late 1970s and early 1980s. Li Tan, the China captain or head of the Chinese community at Hirado, was a remarkable figure in his own right. A native of Guangzhou in Fujian, he traded to the Philippines early in his career and was sentenced to the galleys by the Spaniards for some unknown offense. He escaped and fled to Hirado. There he prospered. By the time he had dealings with the Dutch and English, he was married and, not unusually for a wealthy Chinese, possessed concubines. Captain Huo, his brother, acted as his agent at Nagasaki. Another brother, Ni Quan, lived in Hirado, and a third brother remained in China. Captain Huo was issued Shuinzhou to trade to Annam and Tonking between 1614 and 1680. These are Red Seal permits. Boxer, 1941, pages 402 to 3. Li Tan was evidently a Christian convert, baptized as Andrea or Andreas. One of his daughters, to whom Richard Cox was godfather, was named Ignacia. The following year, Cox wrote to his employer of the East India Company, "I am of your worship's opinion that, except we procure trade into China, it will not quite cost to maintain a factory in Japan. It won't be worth it, in other words." Thomson, 1883, Volume 2, page 297. 3 years later, it seemed that success was at hand at last. "I am now informed by a messenger we sent into China that the old emperor hath resigned the government unto one of his sons, and that the new emperor hath granted our nation trade into China for 2 ships a year, and the place appointed near to Fuzhou, and that there wanted but the firmes seals of 2 viceroys of 2 provinces to confirm it, and that the goshon or passport will be sent us by the next monsoon, and had been here before now had it not been delayed, per the wars of Tartary. Thus much our China friends tell us, and I hope it will prove true." Thompson, 1883, Volume 2, page 324. Despite the closure of the East India Company factory at Hirado, luxuries from Japan continued to be highly esteemed by the wealthiest classes in England. On the 12th of December 1663, a Mr. Abrahall, a contractor supplying chandlery to the Royal Navy, sent the wife of Samuel Pepys a fine Japanese gown. Since this was 40 years since the Hirado factory closed and nearly 10 years prior to the Return's attempt to reopen direct trade between Britain and Japan, the gown can only have been purchased from the Dutch. Taylor, 1967, page 56. At the time of Charles II's death in 1685, the Duchess of Portsmouth, one of his mistresses, possessed cabinets described as masterpieces of Japanese art. Macaulay, 1966, Volume 1, page 324. Unless these had been purchased prior to 1623, which is inherently improbable, they were almost certainly purchased through the Dutch. That the EIC's venture might have prospered more had the factory, as trading posts were then called, been established at Uraga, as Adams suggested, rather than at Hirado, is debatable. Adams was familiar with Uraga, the port he told Saris would be an excellent place for the British East India Company to establish a factory. At the time the 2 men visited Uraga, Saris inquired about the purchase of a ship the Spanish had for sale, but concluded that the price asked, £100, was too dear. He did, however, purchase some Kyoto ceramic ware, which Adams kept at Uraga to sell to the Spaniards. Murdoch, 1949, page 588. Yeah, Uraga is much closer to Edo. It's close to Edo. And Ieyasu wanted the British to be there. Captain Saris observed in September 1613, note that Oringor, Uraga, is a very good harbour for shipping, where ships may ride as safely as in the river of Thames before London, and the passage thereto by sea very safe and good, so that it will be much better for our ships to sail thither than to Hirado. Oringor is for all other matters to be preferred before Hirado. Sato, 1900, page 136. That's Sato's edition of Captain John Saris's journal of the voyage he made in 1613 to Japan. Adams said much the same in his letter to Augustine Spalding in 1613, making the telling point that good harbours were to be found near Edo, Tokyo, the new capital city under the Pax Tokugawa. This is from a letter from Adams. The charges in Japan are not great, only a present for the emperor and a present for the king. That's that would be Ieyasu in this case. And two or three, sorry, or no, wait, the emperor in this case is the secular emperor, so that's Ieyasu, and the king would be the daimyo of Hirado. And two or three other presents for the secretaries. Other costumes here be none. Now, once if a ship do come, let her come for the easterly part of Japan, lying in 35 degrees 10 minutes, where the king and the emperor court is. For come our ships to Ferrando, where the Hollanders be, it is far to the court, about 230 leagues, a wearisome way and foul. The city of Yedo lieth in 36, and about this easterly part of the land there be the best harbours, and a coast so clear, as there is no shoals nor rocks, half a mile from the main land. It is good also for sale of merchandise and security for ships. For which case I have sent a patron question, pattern card or chart of Japan, for which myself I have been all about the cost in the shipping, that I have made for the emperor, that I have experience of all it part of the coast that all the part of the coast that lieth in 36 degrees, etc. Rundle, 1850, page 43. That was a Hakluyt Society publication. It is regrettable that Adams' patron has not survived. Richard Cox evidently shared Adams' estimate of Hirado. Long before the proximity of the VOC factory, the Verenigde Ostindische Compagnie, the Dutch East Indian Company factory, made Hirado a hazardous place, he wrote, "It were as good for the emperor to banish us all out of Japan as to shut us up in Hirado, it being a place of no sales." Thomson, 1883, volume 1, page 187. Cox had strong opinions on the relative merits of Hirado and Nagasaki as harbours. The harbour at Nagasaki is the best in all Japan, where there may be 1,000 sail of ships ride landlocked, and the greatest ships or carracks in the world may go in and out at pleasure, and ride before the town within a cable's length of the shore in 7 or 8 fathom of water at least, it being a great city and many rich merchants dwelling in it, where to the contrary Hirado is a fisher town, and a very small and bad harbour, wherein not above 8 or 10 ships can ride at a time without great danger to spoil one another in stormy weather. And that which is worst, no shipping can enter in or out of that harbour, but they must have both tide and wind, as also 8 or 10 pinnaces or barks to tow them in and out. The current runneth so swift that otherwise they cannot escape running ashore, where to the contrary there is no such matter at Nagasaki, it being one of the fairest and largest harbours that I ever saw, whereinto a man may enter in and go out with shipping at all times, the wind serving without help of boat or pinnace. Thompson, 1883, Volume 2, pages 313 to 314. That Cox bitterly regretted Saris's decision to establish the English factory at Hirado is plain. We settled ourselves at Hirado when we might as well have made choice of any other province of Japan, and now to be so misused, to have some of our people killed, and others extremely misused, and lastly others carried away, captives to be sold to our enemies, which if it were not remedied there was no staying for us in Japan. Thomson, 1883, Volume 2, page 244. This is Cox's diary. Adams knew the eastern and southern coasts of Japan as well as any contemporary Japanese coastal trader or pilot, and his recommendation of Uraga, a port close to present-day Yokosuka, as a suitable situation for the East India Company, should have been heeded. As well as offering a far better harbour for large ships than did Hirado, Uraga was conveniently close to the Shogun's court at Edo and a long way from Dutch and Iberian influence at Hirado and Nagasaki. It had been Uraga for which the Liefde, the Dutch vessel aboard which Adams arrived in Japan, had been making in April 1600, and it was significantly near Uraga that Commodore Matthew Perry's squadron anchored in July 1853. In addition to Uraga's other advantages as a site for the East India Company's station, it was conveniently close to Adams' home and estate at Hemi, granted him by Ieyasu. In disdaining to accept Adams' advice on so crucial a matter, Saris chose to ignore the written instructions of his employers, to consult and take good advice with the rest of the factors, and especially with William Adams, an Englishman now resident there, Japan, and in great favour with the king, as we hear. Sato, 1900, Roman pages 13 to 14. Adams lived in an era of astonishing individuals, such as Fray Juan Pobre of Zamora, whose remarkable career has been described by Professor Boxer in terms of suitable awe. Boxer, 1951, pages 480 to 481. Nor were these remarkable men all Europeans. The first Japanese to visit Moscow, Brother Nicolau of the Order of St. Augustine, arrived in that city from Goa in 1599 and was martyred there in 1611. The posthumous cult of William Adams, which continues unabated to the present day, is not the least singular aspect of a singular life. There remains the enigma of William Adams the man. William Adams, the staunch Protestant and former master and pilot in Her Majesty's ships, who married a Japanese Catholic woman, knowingly committing bigamy by so doing, and who refused offers to return to his own country on at least 4 occasions. Adams, the man to whom the Jesuit chroniclers ascribed malign influences little short of diabolical. Adams, the man who never lacked Catholic friends and associates during a sojourn in Japan lasting 2 decades. Adams, the man who fathered a 5th child by an unknown woman in Hirado, and who died wealthy, yet neglected to make any provision for either this third mother or her child in his will, who referred to the Christian deity not infrequently in his letters, and who was given a posthumous Buddhist name. Adams was neither wholly admirable nor contemptible, a man of modest, formal education. He was, for a short span of years, undeniably the most influential foreigner in Japan, supplanting one of the most learned foreigners in contemporary Japan, João Rodrigues Tsusi. Hope I've pronounced that right. Any consideration of Adams' life in Japan necessarily involves an understanding of the Christian century, the remarkable period between 1543, the year of the arrival of the first Europeans, and 1639, the year in which it was decreed that Japan was virtually closing her doors to the outside world. In the century following 1543, the year in which the first Portuguese mariners, Antonio da Mota, Francisco Zemoto, and Antonio Peixoto, arrived in Japan, and by an uncanny coincidence, the year after that which Tokugawa Ieyasu was born, Japanese official policy made a complete circle. Although official policies and the direction of events in Japan as elsewhere are not infrequently notoriously difficult to discern at the time, 7 quite clear periods are apparent in retrospect. Firstly, the ready receptivity to and acceptance of Europeans after the first arrival of the Portuguese at Tanegashima in 1543. It's an island to the south of Kagoshima. Secondly, apparent encouragement of the Jesuit missionaries in the time of Oda Nobunaga. Thirdly, encouragement and continuation of the Portuguese trade between Macau and Nagasaki on the one hand, and on the other, the first bloody repression and martyrdom of Christians in the time of Toyotomi Hideyoshi. Fourthly, far-flung overseas trade by Japanese traders and mariners in officially sanctioned vermilion seal ships, Shuinsen, commencing in the days of Toyotomi Hideyoshi. Fifthly, invasion of the Korean peninsula on the mainland of China, intended as the prelude to the conquest of all China, followed by ignominious withdrawal after Hideyoshi's death in 1598. Sixthly, intensifying and systematic persecution of Christianity from 1614 onwards in the time of Tokugawa Ieyasu. Seventhly, total prohibition of Japanese travel abroad in the 1630s, followed by the expulsion of the Portuguese and the adoption of sakoku, a policy of national isolation, in 1639. Events which occurred prior to Adams' arrival in Japan aboard the Leaf Day affected his life in Japan greatly. It is with the period in which Adams lived in Japan, the years 1600 to 1620, no less than with the life of Adams, the man per se, with which this work deals. At the time of the first Europeans' arrival, independent warlords governed or misgoverned their territories as they pleased, without paying heed to the authority of Emperor in Miyako, Kyoto, to whom all were nominally subject. On various occasions, Miyako was raided and burned by marauding bands of soldiers and even wayward monks whom court officials acting in the emperor's name were powerless to control. This lawless state of affairs, Sengoku Jidai, the country at war, lasted until the middle of the 16th century. The first of 3 ruthless and remarkable men, Oda Nobunaga, 1534 to 82, began his career as an insignificant baron governing a single province, yet his military skill and utter ruthlessness enabled him to gain control of no fewer than 32 of the 66 provinces before his assassination in 1582. His achievements were defended and consolidated by his able lieutenant Toyotomi Hideyoshi, 1536 to 98, who subdued the southern provinces and launched an invasion of Korea during his rule of 16 years. His successor, Tokugawa Ieyasu, 1542 to 1616, completed the work of national unification under a strong central government, independent in all but name from the imperial court in Miyako. Ieyasu's successors instituted a policy of national isolation, sakoku, which kept Japan aloof from the rest of the world until the middle of the 19th century. Sakoku is actually a country in chains. Sa meaning chains, and koku meaning country. The ludicrous and apparently ineradicable practice of referring to Adams by a folksy diminutive of his name was begun by William Dalton, the British Victorian novelist, in his book Will Adams, the First Englishman in Japan, published in 1861. As Dr. Michael Cooper of Sophia University has observed, Adams was referred to in his lifetime as William Adams, Captain Adams and Master Adams. Cooper, 1982, page 121. Cox referred to him as Adams on at least one occasion, and it is interesting to note that Adams signed himself as Adams with 2 Ds and an E at the end. Adams. Even John Saris, the general of the first British expedition to Japan, described ridiculously by Papineau as a salesman of the English factory of Bantam, Papineau, 1988, page 784. That is a ridiculous description indeed. Referred to Adams in reasonably respectful terms, although there was little affection between the 2 men. And if you think it is good to appoint Mr. Adams captain of the business, it will stir up his spirits, who hath lain fruitless there a long time. Sato, 1900, page 209. That Saris could assert that Adams, a pilot known all along the coast, an advisor to Tokugawa Ieyasu, a cartographer and shipbuilder to the Bakufu, had lain fruitless in Japan is a measure of how little of Adams' position in Japan Saris grasped, or indeed was willing to grasp, because they didn't get on. Adams built two ships for Tokugawa Ieyasu. The larger of these conveyed Don Rodrigo Vivero y Velasco to Acapulco, that's Mexico, isn't it? After the San Francisco foundered on the Japanese coast in 1609. Named the Santa Buenaventura, it remained in Spanish service for many years. So he was a pretty good shipbuilder in the end. Japanese gunsmiths could cast guns comparable to European weapons. The financing, construction, and manning of a Japanese fleet, greatly superior to the combined fleets of all European powers in Pacific waters, would have been well within the power of Tokugawa Japan early in the 17th century. Had the Bakufu made the construction of an ocean-going fleet of large, well-armed European-style ships a major policy objective, there can be no doubt that the conquest of the Philippines and probably the Indonesian archipelago would have been perfectly feasible. Story, 1985, page 65. Subsequent voyages would have brought them to the immense island known today as Australia, already known to the Portuguese from 1542 at the latest and probably from an unascertainable date between 1511 and 1529. Stevens, 1930, page 5. Two Portuguese cannon of the period, 1475 to 1525, were recovered from Broome Bay in northwest Australia. It is presumed that they came from a single wrecked vessel rather than having been used as a ballast on a Dutch vessel at a later date. The Portuguese knew far more about the vast southern continent than they were willing to disclose, being justifiably apprehensive that the Dutch, ever eager and ready to exploit Portuguese knowledge for their own ends, would somehow turn Portuguese discoveries to their own advantage. Major, 1859, page 5, Roman page 5. Recent linguistic research carried out in the northwest of Western Australia has established that the Ngaluma and Carriera tribes have a great many Portuguese loanwords in their vocabulary. Only the presence of Portuguese residents or sojourners, voluntary or otherwise, can be presumed to be adequate explanation of this. Von Brandenstein, 1989, 190 pages 195 to 9. Beyond the immense island now known as Australia are the two islands now known as New Zealand. Had the Japanese been resolute oceanic sailors in the early Tokugawa period, nothing would have stood between them and the discovery and settlement of an area far larger than that temporarily conquered in 1942. So that is the end of the preface, first chapter of this book. I will stop the share now. I shall put reference to the URLs for the purchase of the book in the description. So I hope the publishers will then forgive me for for doing this off my own bat, as it were. So it should be a kind of free advertising for them. All right. Well, I hope that was of interest. For me, it's of great interest and a great introduction to the period which I am currently moving into. And I'd like to thank you for your perseverance, as usual. If you have listened and watched or watched up to this point. So see you again soon. Goodbye now.